Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the exchange, right? Or more commonly spoken of as the exchange sacrifice. All right. Um, when is it good to give up the exchange, right? Like when you hear a lot about these sacrifices on C3 in the Sicilian, for instance, rook taking the knight. For instance, you might have these type of positions. Say like for instance in the dragon. Three castle. I'll say bishop c4. Just try to come up with some type of typical dragon dragon stuff here. Right, let's say h4, right, h5, right, and you get all of this stuff going on, right? Bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, and let's just say white does a move like that. And I'm not, this is a random position, but I just want to give you an idea for the beginning players. This would be an exchange sacrifice. Rook takes c3 because you have a piece of greater value, which is the rook on c4, being exchanged, right? Thus, the exchange for a piece of lesser value. And when we say lesser value, we're talking about in pure static terms because, of course, every strong player knows that the value of the pieces fluctuates according to the position. Okay, always remember that. But the value of the pieces spoken of as if you just had them just lined up at the beginning of the game. In other words, um, as far as what they can actually do, their potential, right? Their upside, in other words. So, for instance, if you have open files and stuff, the rooks, of course, will shine, and they're better than the knights as far as their upside is concerned. So, you put the knight in the center of the board and say, okay, how many squares can this piece reach? And you put the rook in the center of the board and did the same thing, you will find that the rook has more upside and potential. So, that's why it's called an exchange sacrifice. So the rook theoretically, and I emphasize theoretically, has more value than the knight, right? But on the board, in practicality in real life, things could be different. But here's an example of an exchange sacrifice that occurs common in the Sicilian. Now, whether it's right or wrong, that's that is up to the judgment of the player and ultimately the position. But here, the rook is of which is higher value is given up for a piece of lesser value. But what's the compensation? The compensation here is the ripped open um, king side, and then normally you would get moves like queen a5, for instance, and then this other rook would try to scurry over, and it's just a race against the race against the kings. Which side's gonna get mated first, basically. Okay. And it's just an example. Now, if I'm white here, I would be worried, and I'll play a move like that to try to go probably into an endgame here. Queen takes, and then rook takes c3, and so that's an example of an exchange sacrifice. So we see white has the two rooks going forward, and black has a rook, bishop, and knight. But his pawn structure is better. So this is a very complicated game. Um, Black has a very solid pawn situation, but no attack. His knight should be able to find a good home somewhere on these dark squares, and he has a light square bishop that can freely travel around the board. Alright, so this is like one of those double-edged positions. So that's what we're going to talk about, is the exchange today. And most of my notes are taken from one of my favorite books, which is The Middle Game by Max Euwe and Kramer. Alright, so let's look at some examples, and these examples are going to be old since I'm, taking them from this classic text. Alright, so in this example, we'll see where just a pawn being a pawn up is not sufficient compensation for the exchange. Okay, and this game is between Kramer and Thomas, which took place in 1949. So never mind the age of the game, but just focus on the lesson here. So like I said, we're going to speed through these opening moves and such, and just get to the critical points in the position here. Okay, we have this orthodox Queen's Gambit, Alaska variation. C6, Bishop D3, and now we have a Stonewall, Castle. Kramer is white, by the way, who is the co-author of this book, and Sir George Thomas, strong English player, as the black pieces. 95, takes. Bishop D7, you see the idea is to get the problem bishop out. 92, Bishop E8, and black is solving his opening problems. And this is the major problem, is getting this bishop liberated. Now we see Queen C7. Looking at this pawn right here, but he has to be careful on this file. F4, and now that occurs, he switches over to E7. C takes D5, E takes D5, and black straightens out his pawns, but now he has to keep an eye, and a vigilant eye, on the passed pawn. Knight D4, and Rook C8, which is probably a blunder here. Yeah, just maybe Bishop D7 here. And Rook C8, because this piece is unprotected, and C file is very, very vulnerable here. Let's see what happens. So Bishop takes E4, F takes E4, and Knight B5. And you see, that's why I said it was a mistake, because now he can't capture here, and this knight has free access to the D6 square. So you got to keep an eye on, like, tactics. Always unprotected pieces. Unprotected pieces always should be like a red flag. Sometimes you could get away with it, but you don't want to make it a habit. Anyway, Knight B5. So now he's like, man, I made a mistake. He moves over Rook D8, but it's too late. Knight D6. Now here, his knight is super strong here, and the only way to get rid of it is to give up the exchange. This is the wrong color bishop to affect that knight. So he plays Rook takes D6, E takes D6, Queen takes D6. So what's the compensation? It's just a pawn. Alright. So now here's Euwe's notes. It says black has no compensation for the exchange, his bishop being on the wrong color. Okay. But if white should now play the inviting Queen C5 on the principle that a material advantage is best utilized by heading for the endgame, then comes, so he gives this line, Queen C5, takes, and then he gives B6, Rook C3, and C5, right? And his point is that if white tries to rush into the endgame, this bad bishop all of a sudden becomes a good bishop, because now it can come out. It has some freedom now. Okay, it can come into play with b5, and the bishop will end up here and then come to this square. All right, and then again after c5, the possibility of d3. So just to show you again what he's talking about here. And basically the idea is to bring the bishop here, which would be very strong, and then later on orchestrate the pawn advance. And if you look at my video on the phalanx, you'll understand how to advance these type of pawn structures. Okay, so basically white has to be vigilant, very vigilant here, so that central majority can be dangerous. All right, so this is why, even though white is up material, he doesn't rush into the endgame. Instead, he played this move right here, queen c3. All right, and now basically what he wants to do is make sure these pawns, the black pawns, are fixed on the same color as the bishop, and render that bishop as ineffective as possible. All right, and he's also preparing for the assault on the king with f5 and f6. So queen c3, bishop d7, b4. Notice fixing the pawns. a6. Now b6, f5 is possible here with the idea of, if bishop takes f5, then queen takes c6. So a6, queen d4, and notice the domination, keeping the pawns fixed. Rook fd1, and this has the threat again. Notice the unprotected queen on d6. The threat is simply queen takes e4, so the queen drops back. a4, king h7, and there's the breakthrough, b5. Okay, so he sacrifices a pawn. Why? Because rooks need open files to really show their upside and potential. This is what this is about. A takes, and then rook a8, b takes, and he's trying to keep the position blocked as much as possible, but to no avail. Rook a1, rook a3. Black desperately tries to hold on to control of that file, and then finally he has to give it up. Rook a1, queen b3, h3, queen d3, and again Kramer avoids the endgame here. Now he could have just simply played queen takes g3, but after e takes, king f2, and bishop b5. This pawn is something that white may have been concerned about, even though it looks pretty straightforward. But I can see maybe why he would avoid that at this point. So after h3, queen d3, queen c5 was played, king g6, and rook a8. And just wrap this up real quick. King h5, king h2, queen e2, rook g8, and now black resigned. Okay, so for example, if king g6 and queen d4, g5, queen e7. Okay, and you see the black bishop is useless. So there's an example right there of the exchange, right? Not having sufficient compensation for the exchange. But again, that came as a result of an error, as you may recall, that rook c8 move right there, and that is the major downfall of black in this game. Is after that, and then this move right here. All right, so we're gonna move on. This position is from Lasker Janowski from their match in 1909. Lasker has the white pieces, Janowski the black pieces. Now, according to Dr. Tarish, a knight in the middle of the board, you see right here, protected by a pawn and out of range of an enemy pawn, right? There's nothing here to drive the knight away. Is stronger than a bishop and nearly as strong as a rook. So that's a quote from him. So in this position, notice the pressure on the f pawn, right? So here black can soon win the f pawn, and this d pawn is also weak. All right, so notice all of these things combined, right, gives black adequate compensation for the exchange, right? And that's the general idea. And also notice the closed nature of the position. All right, this is not mentioned in the notes, but just notice the closed nature of the position. The rooks can't be too effective at this point, but the knight can be. So Lasker played rook to f1. Okay, and now Janowski played queen to f7, just putting more pressure here, right? Threatening this check. Now Lasker is a slick fellow, all right, and the idea behind that move, rook f1, is if knight takes f5, then rook d f3 immediately turns the tables and wins for white. Okay, so you might say, well, why not rook takes f5? If rook takes f5, rook takes, and if knight takes, rook f3 wins again. Okay, and say, for instance, knight e7. Here's queen e7, queen e6 check. And black is in all sorts of trouble. Okay, after, say, for instance, a move like king h2, and I say he tries to check, simply here, queen h7. Okay, and black is just done for. So it was a very slick move there. Okay, so after rook f1, Janowski sees through this and plays queen f7. Okay. Now, of course, he's threatening here, and Lasker plays a real natural move, queen to g2. All right. Just protecting here. So now rook takes f5, rook takes f5, queen takes f5. Rook is attacked. Rook moves over. And this costs the pawn. But what else is he going to do? And it costs the pawn after queen b1 check. King h2 and queen takes b4. Now the critical continuation here is a move like, say for instance, rook a3, attacking here. But if rook a3, then simply this pawn starts to march e4, and say for example rook takes, it's e3. Then if he tries to come back, just e2. And the other critical line is instead of rook e3, it's rook d1, which in turn is met by knight f3. And if rook f1, same thing, e4. Okay, so in the game, Lasker played rook e3, probably the best practical continuation. King h2, queen takes, and he gives up the pawn because he figures he has the rook and queen, and if he can open up, you know, any of these files, he'll be able to launch an attack. Of course, h4, keeping the position closed. Okay. So, what's Black's plan in this position? Is basically, you got this 2 against 1, queenside majority. So the idea is to push these queenside pawns, but don't let white become active. That means keeping the files closed on the king side as much as possible. That's the general, your general plan there. Lasker plays king h3, queen c4, keeping the eye here, and also allowing these guys to march down the board. Queen e4. All right. Now, the problem with this move right away is knight f5 check. And notice that the pawn can't capture the knight because of the queen. So Lasker's alert. He plays queen e4. Janowski plays king g7. The king takes h4. And now finds a great move, queen f1. And the idea here is before he can bring these pawns forward, he basically is this. Black has to eliminate all the counterplay from white, because white's counterplay is very dangerous. Remember, he has the queen, he has the exchange, he has powerful pieces. So he has to make sure that before he starts marching these pawns forward, that he has to eliminate any chance of him basically getting checkmated. And that's what this phase of the game is about. So queen f1 happens. Okay, and what he's trying to do here, what the idea is to prevent king coming to g5. Because once the king gets to g5, then the queen can come to g6. And it's all over. Okay, so queen f1. Lasker plays a3. Janowski plays a5. Now queen f2 check. Might have been better here. He comes back, king g3. And now you have queen g1. Okay. Check. And again, check is important because if white can move, he wants to play rook e1, and then say after queen c4, then he'll move this rook over here to the h file, and then now you have problems here with the queen coming in. This is why you see queen g1, king h3 is forced. If king h4, queen h2, and then say for instance rook h3, queen f2, and now this would be correct, but just for example, knight e2, of course he could resign here. So king h3, queen f2. This move right here keeps the rook from really moving anywhere, because now if he tries rook e1, then black plays knight f3. Okay. And any other kind of move like rook c3 is meant by knight e2. And same with rook g3, knight e2. Alright, so queen f2. So he plays g5. And now we see the pawns coming down the board. A takes. There's the passer. King g4. Yanofsky plays queen g1. And here Euwe points out that that move was superfluous, and that he could have just played b3. Okay, so, but anyway, Yanofsky didn't see it. He played queen g1. King h5. Queen h2. King g4. Now he played b3. Rook e1, of course, threatening here. Queen c2. King h5. Queen takes. Rook takes. And knight c2. Okay, now this is a good move because there's no way that black can stop the pawn now. So guards this square from that. Okay, and if say like rook h4, b2, rook h1, then the knight comes here, controlling the final square. Alright, so after queen takes e4, rook takes e4, knight c2. Lasker pulls out his last bag of tricks. The idea is, of course, if pawn takes, then this pawn will advance. And Yanofsky played b2, but just know that this also wins. Okay, the idea is if d takes, then just simply d6, b2, d takes, queen, queen, knight e3 check, king g3, and black winds up mating white. But it's understandable why Yanofsky didn't go into that. Because usually if you see, a simple, like a simple win, and you're gonna take that. So he just played B2, rook E7, king F8, rook takes, queen, and Yanovsky went on to win a couple of more moves. Rook C8, king E7. Might as well just finish it off. King D8, rook D7, king E8, rook D6, and after knight D4, Lasker resigned. Okay, so that's an example right there where the exchange is good. Giving up the exchange is good, but notice that black had compensation. Okay, and the compensation was he had this knight protected in the middle of the board. There was no way to remove the knight. Okay, black also had pressure. Black also had pressure on the F pawn and the D pawn. So he had compensation. It wasn't just like he was down in exchange. He had positional compensation. Notice the white king is also exposed, etc. All right. So let's look at another position. This next position is between player with the white pieces named Selesnyev, and with the black pieces is former world champion Alexander Alekhine. This game is from Triberg 1921, so this is before Alekhine was world champion, but he was a very strong player at this time. And black to move, a lot of you can already understand, the concept and seeing what he wanted to play here, what he played. Okay. Alekhine played rook to b4, right in the line of this bishop. Okay. Selesnyev did not hesitate. Bishop takes b4. C takes b4. Okay. So first thing, what is black getting for the exchange? Okay, for the exchange, black now has these following advantages. 1, protected pass pawn. 2, bishop pair. 3, white has a weak A pawn and a weak C pawn. Okay. 4, C5 square. Okay, so I don't even really need to go any further with it. Okay, so that's the type of things you're looking for when it comes to giving up the exchange. You see all of those things that black has, right? And the idea, the trick of it, is to be able to see all of that from here. Okay? So when you're here, you have to be able to see all of that going on. So he played rook b4, and if Selesnyev doesn't take, then black just simply would double up here. For instance, rook fc1, rook fb8. And then the game is just equal here. Right? Say after rook takes here and here. Okay, nothing to write home about. But at the rook b4, takes, and then Selesnyev here played the move knight d2. Okay, so again, blockading principles. So, and that's where the knight is going. Now, Alekhine played knight c5. All right, which was not the most accurate move. He should have played rook c8 right away, because then this knight can't move here right away because of the pressure on the c pawn. Okay. Then, so rook c8, maintaining the pressure, and then move like bishop c3 coming up next, and then even knight b6. So instead, he made a slight inaccuracy. He played knight to c5, and now knight b3. Okay, now the reason behind it is it was an oversight by Alicon. He thought knight b3 couldn't be played because of the attack here. So for instance, knight b3, now this pawn seemed to be hanging. Okay, but now if knight takes a4, sorry, Euwe gives rook a1 here, basically giving up the exchange himself. Right, so he gives rook a1, knight c5, knight takes a5, bishop takes a5, rook takes a1. King g7, because you got to watch out for bishop takes g6. And he gives knight c6 here. But this move is very powerful. Okay, and then the tables get flipped on black. So after knight c5, knight b3, and Alicon just goes back. He realizes he made a mistake. And now Seleznev plays c5. Right. Bishop takes d3. E takes d3. D takes c5. And rook fe1. Knight e5. Rook e3. Rook c8 was played. Rook c1. See the piling up here. Queen d7. d4. Knight g4. Rook e4. c4. So we see this is black's main compensation is that 3-1 majority there. Knight c5, queen f5, queen e2. Okay, so white is gambling everything on that move right there because he's attacking the c pawn and the e pawn, right? And double attacking the knight right here. So what more can you ask from a move? So Alicon just presses forward with b3. Now he just takes, rook takes g4, b2, queen takes b2, and now he gives back the exchange. Rook takes c4, and h5. Okay, so here black kind of changes the game, switches the game up, and opens up a sharp attack on the king. Okay, so I'm not going to continue on with the rest of the game. Alicon did go on to win this game, but since we're talking about, you know, the exchange and the compensation for it, there's no need to continue on with that. But just so you can see those, you know, those examples. And like I said, just remember, you know, this position and what black was able to get in exchange for the exchange. All right, let's look at the next joint. This position again with black to move. Right, looks like the last position, right? But this game is between Lublinsky and Botvinnik. for Moscow 1943. And now since I showed you that Alekhine game, you can see what Botvinnik played here. Okay, so we saw in the last game that putting the rook on a strongly supported point on an open file gives good chances, especially if you have the bishop here. Okay, so let's look at what happened. So Botvinnik played rook d4. Okay, and notice the same characteristics apply, whereas he has the bishop here, in exchange for the exchange here. And also, if the exchange is taken, he's going to have a beautiful connected pass pawn. Alright. But here, white did not take the exchange. Okay, he played knight e2. So white's idea here is that he wants to take the exchange, but he wants to take with the knight instead of taking with the bishop. Okay. So now Euwe thinks he should have just took with the bishop, with the idea that since there is going to be a pass pawn appearing on d4, that the knight is better for blockading the pass pawn, so he should have given up the bishop. So Euwe gives the line, bishop takes d4, he gives c takes d4, knight a4, with the idea of coming here and here. Right, so for example, c4, knight b2, knight b2, and then knight d3. Okay. However, white played knight e2. Botvinnik played bishop c8. And now knight takes d4, c takes d4, and he played bishop f2. Now, Euwe again gives bishop d2, and the idea is so that the bishop has more scope, right? Covering two diagonals instead of being right here, not really doing nothing. Okay. And the idea behind the bishop being here is that later on, the bishop can support the advance of the pawns on the wing, right, on the queen side, right, with a3 and b4, or if need be, support the advance f4 at some point. So this bishop is very well placed here. On f2, there's really nothing going on. Botvinnik plays c5, rook to f1, f5 is played, bishop g3, and Botvinnik plays bishop d7. Now, if f4, hold on, sorry, bishop d, what do we got? Bishop g3, bishop d7 was played first. Sorry about that. And now, if white plays f4, bishop c6, and if bishop d7, f4, and then if trying to think, yeah, bishop c6, right, and if e takes, yeah, that's nice. Yep, that's what I figured. Sorry about that. I got caught up in this variation I was looking at. So f4, so bishop d7, rook ae1 was played, and then black played f4, bishop f2, and g5, and we see the the board taking on the formation, looking like a King's Indian attack or something like that. And notice again, the exchange, that black is giving up doesn't really mean too much because the position is closed. There's no open files for the rooks. So black has, just full compensation for the exchange. So G4 is played, which is a big error. And just now, matter of fact, over a comment here, I'll just read this because I just said the same thing. I wasn't looking at it. It says the white rooks have no open file and so cannot make their weight felt. Right? Then he says the best plan consists in opening a file on the queen side, the natural method being A3 and B4. It is possible that this was white's intention, but that he wished to see the king side closed first. This was false reasoning. Black does not permit the closing, and it transpires that the move played has only provided for more targets of attack, which is right here, of course. Right, so after G4, F takes, bishop takes, and now the bishop comes in harassing. Rook F2, H5, Rook D2, H4. Okay. Now this is known as the Steinitz method for making the best of two bishops and the two bishops, which is depriving the enemy pieces of all their best squares. So bishop F2 was played, Rook F8, Rook D3, and this is an extreme example of compensation for an exchange. Rook F8, Rook D3, Rook F4, and King H1, King H7, Rook to G1, and he's just trying to hold back this G4 move from happening. Bishop D8, Queen E2, Queen F7. G4 is again a threat because the queen is only protecting the bishop. So now we got Queen D1. And the idea here is to meet G4 with F takes G4, Rook takes F2, and then Rook takes H3. So of course, Bavanik plays Queen H5. Okay, now there's no defense to G4 here. So now he plays Bishop E3. Of course, if he takes here, then let's take that. Queen takes F3. Queen takes, Rook takes, Bishop G5, Rook D3, Bishop D8, Rook E3, and that destroys White's last opportunity, which was based on the opposite color bishop ending. You got this light square bishop and the dark square bishop, and sometimes you can draw. So after the E pawn falls, then Black's gonna have these connected passed pawns. Okay, and that kind of overrides the fact that there's opposite color bishops in this position. So Bishop B6, Rook takes, Bishop takes E5, Rook E2, Rook D1, Bishop to G4, H3, Bishop takes H3, and B4, Bishop F5, Bishop D6, D3, B takes H5 and H3, and Black just resigns. Now, when the enemy king's position has been weakened, the type of exchange sacrifice which we have been discussing in the last two examples can be quickly decisive, especially if the outpost on the open file is still deeper inside enemy territory. So, I'm going to give you two brief examples of that. Okay, in this position, is white to move here, and we see that this rook is under attack by the knight on g5. We also see the weakened position of the king, the light squares in particular. This game is between Najdorf, right, and famous Polish grandmaster who emigrated to Argentina, and Trivunovic, 1949. And this is an example of what I was just saying. Notice how the penetration point is deep inside the enemy territory. So here, Najdorf played rook a e1, knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook b, rook b to e8, queen f5, d5, bishop takes d5. So now you see the idea was to, the idea behind d5 was to bring the bishop back to blockade. So you see blockade, bishop e4, rook d8, f4, now c6, king h2, rook d5, and now black is practically forced to give back the exchange. Bishop takes, c takes, and now we see rook e3, rook g8, still can't stop it, rook g3, queen f8, queen d5, and now the pieces are equal, but the pawns are not equal. Bishop f2, and king h7, and black just resigned without even waiting for white to make a move. Okay, again, white to move, and now you should be getting the point now, right? You should start, getting a hold of this right now. So this position is from Guimard, right? Namesake of the Guimard variation in the French defense. The white pieces and a player named Michel is from Mar del Plata, 1949. So of course Guimard knows what's happening. Put his rook right there. Knight takes, d takes, queen scurried over to c7, right? Just applied some more pressure there. Bishop f4, threatening to, of course, win back the exchange. Queen a7, bishop takes d6, bishop b3, bishop takes f8, king takes f8, queen d6 check, queen e7, queen takes, rook takes, check, and black just resigned. I mean, it's a wrap. So you can see how devastating the exchange sacrifice is, especially when it occurs deep in the enemy's position and he has some type of weakness on the king side. I mean, this was just brutal right here. I mean, just, nobody wants that to happen to him. All right, this quick game is between Bronstein and Boleslavsky from the 1950 match. It's exactly from the first match game. Okay, and we're gonna see the exchange counterbalanced by two bishops in the weakened king side. So let me run through this quickly. I don't want to make the video too long, but then at the same time, I want to make it to where even like a baby can understand it. right? And then you could just look at this video maybe a couple of times, and then you'll be an expert. You'll be giving up the exchange left and right, and it'll all be at the right times. Okay, so this is the old style Grunfeld defense. I used to play this line. I put my knight on e2. Knight c6, bishop e3, bishop g4. Old school right here. Bishop f3, knight a5, bishop d3, and then bishop e6. And now, in this position, this is a well-known position. The offer is, and this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of the video. The offer of the exchange d5, where sometimes white will give up his rook on a1 for the powerful fianchetto bishop on g7. And the thing to understand is that with the King's Indian defense, Dutch, Leningrad variation, even the Grunfeld, that dragon variation, the Sicilian, that bishop on g7 is like basically like the reason to be in the position. Basically, everything is revolving around that diagonal, and the strength of that diagonal, and then the subsequent play on the queen side. For instance, in the Grunfeld rather, you have this 2-to-1 queen side majority. Everything is designed to play on the queen side. You got the bishop soaring on this side, and it's like many times white will willing to give up this rook for this bishop right here. Then, of course, after that, you create weaknesses on the queen side. On the king side once this bishop is absent. So in this position, Bronstein played d5, right? Bishop takes a1, queen takes a1. All right, so it's a well-known position. d5 has been played. White has given up the exchange. Again, we always have to assess what's the compensation. 1, bishop pair. 2, with the disappearance of the black bishop from g7, black's g6 is now a weakening, right? Because situations like that, and mate, right? 3, white has a pawn majority in the center. This always favors the attacker, all right? Black's queenside majority is more important than the ending. But right now, in move 15, this pawn majority in the center favors the attacker. Okay, let's keep going. So after queen takes a1, f6, it's a further weakening, right? This is unavoidable because white was just simply threatening to regain the exchange by bishop h6, leaving black with no compensation for his weakened king side. So after f6, bishop h6, attacking the rook, queen b6. Okay. Bronstein played king h1, and now rook fd8. Okay, so he goes to save the exchange. And the idea, of course, is that then this piece gets exchanged off. Rook b1, and now queen c5. Bishop d2. Excuse me, not b5, but b6 was played. Bishop b4, queen c7. Rook to c1, queen b7. And then Bronstein played queen b1. Then there's a double threat here. One is to take. Bishop takes a5, and the other is to take here. Notice how the queen is protecting the bishop on d3. Alright, let's do it. Okay, so rook ab8. Okay, so that loses, of course. to D takes E6. Another alternative is bishop C8, right? But then moves like knight D4 and knight F4. God, they're threatening E5 is very powerful. So rook A to B8, and D takes E6. And now this rook, right, that's his only compensation for the exchange, is no match for these two bishops. Alright. And to boot, black has all this weakness around the king. Alright. And then Bronstein went on to win this game. Alright, moving on. Okay. Now in this example between Bronstein with the white pieces and Stahlberg with the black pieces from Budapest 1950, we're going to see that exchange is actually offset, alright, by the pawn preponderance in the center. So in other words, the person that gives up the exchange does not have enough compensation. So let's look. Bronstein has the white pieces and Gideon Stahlberg with the black pieces. Alright, E6, D4, D5, your favorite defense, the French. Knight F6, Bishop G5, Bishop E7, E5, Knight FD7, H4, and this is the what is this, Alekhine Chattard attack with this pawn sacrificed. C5, Bishop takes E7, Queen takes E7, King takes E7 is probably better. And now Knight B5, of course. Castles. Knight C7. And this is why, you know, you keep the queen here. But anyway, C takes D4. Knight takes A8. Okay, F6. Queen takes D5. Knight C6. Queen D2, and we can see that black's idea is obviously to cause white to waste a lot of time going after this rook in the corner, and he fell behind in development, okay, and secured complete control of the center. Castle, Knight F6, F3 from Bronstein, trying to contest the central squares. Queen D6, Knight E2, Bishop D7, Knight C3, and Rook takes A8. Alright. So, here's Euwe. It is a well-known fact that the owner of a strong pawn center often gets automatic attacking chances. The attempt to achieve such a center by an exchange sacrifice is nothing new. Okay? And in practice, it has been repeatedly successful. You see the same idea with this in what is it, the Vienna game. There's a variation, for whatever reason, it's called the Frankenstein Dracula variation. Look that up, and you'll see the same exact principle here, in similar looking position where white is allowed to go after the rook on A8, but then black gets a beautiful center, and it's well known that that variation is good for black. All right, let's keep going on with this one though. 94. Okay. Now we just talked about the attacking chances of the one who possesses the strong center. So of course, white wants to take away attacking chances, so he's aiming to exchange the minor pieces. Notice the queen is vulnerable, so this is not happening. So after Queen E7, Knight takes, Queen takes, Bishop B5. Okay, Knight B8. Why Knight B8? Because the bishop is bad in this position for black. So he instead of him losing his knight, he rather exchange, if he has to exchange, he'd rather give up the bad bishop. Queen b4, takes, takes, queen f7, c4. Okay. Knight c6, c takes d5, knight d4 happened, queen d3, e takes d5, rook h, f1. Okay, now idea is to undermine the position of this knight. Okay, so he wants to play f4. Check, king b1, rook d8, g3. Okay, queen takes g3, f4, queen takes, rook takes, knight c6, f takes, knight takes, rook d4. Knight c6, rook df4, and then knight e5 was played. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go any further with that game. We see here that black was not able to win in this game, giving up the exchange. Bronstein, of course, consolidated, as you can see here. He beat back the the big center that black had earlier in the game, and he was able to turn that around. So I still like black's position earlier. It seemed like he had like nice, beautiful center. It was way ahead in development. But Bronstein, showed the great player he is and played very effectively. But again, you see the ideas behind the exchange, that when you give up the exchange, you have to be able to point out some compensation. Whereas in this case, it was this massive lead in development, and also this big pawn center, which often will translate into attacking chances. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so we're almost done, and that ends that section, which like basically discussed a rook against bishop or knight. So just the exchange, in general, like one piece, one rook for one bishop, or one rook for one knight, what have you. Classic exchange. So you should understand that you must have some type of compensation for the exchange, whether it's open king, two bishops, advanced passed pawns. Usually that the deeper the exchange sacrifice takes place in the territory, the more effective it is. The effectiveness of having the knight anchored in the center without pawns being able to attack and stuff. You should be able to glean all that stuff from those previous examples that I've given. And again, that's why it's on video, because you could just watch it, watch it like 2 or 3 times or whatever, and at your own leisure. That's why I do this. I know the video is a little long, but it's thorough. So everything you need to know about the exchange is right here. This second section, and there's only a couple of games because we've covered the exchange well enough. But this second section is another form of the exchange that occurs commonly, and that's when you have the rook against 2 minor pieces. So a lot of endgames you'll have rook versus knight and bishop, or rook versus 2 bishops, or whatever, or rook versus 2 knights. So we're just gonna look at a couple of examples briefly, and looking at this imbalance. So this first game, right, is between the third game between a match between Capablanca and Alicante in 1927. All right. So let's look at it real quick. D4, knight f6, knight f3, b6, g3, bishop b7, bishop g2. Again, Capablanca has white pieces, Alicante black pieces. c5, castle, c takes, knight takes, bishop takes, king takes, d5, c4, e6, queen a4, queen d7, and I'm purposely not commenting on these moves. b5, knight c6, c takes, e takes, bishop f4, rook c8, rook to c1, bishop c5. This allows a tactical blow here. b4, bishop takes b4, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, and Capablanca played queen takes b4. And you see all this weakness going on in the dark squares. And now there's our imbalance. Knight e4, knight d2, knight takes d2, and queen d2 by Capablanca and Alicante castle. So we can see the imbalance right here. Right, black has a pawn as well as a rook against two minor pieces. All right. Now the question is that enough compensation for black? The answer is usually, of course, there's always exceptions. The answer is usually no. In practice, it's seldom enough. All right. Irva says it is certain that the minor piece player must go for the attack, for in that way he will make the most of his advantage. The rook player will generally welcome exchanges, since it is in the end game that he will have drawing chances. Okay, so if you have the minor pieces, so here Capablanca should be playing for an attack because you're up a piece. Okay, as the game simplifies, then black has better drawing chances of, say, king and rook versus king versus knight and bishop. But here, with the extra piece, white should be trying to attack. So that's the basic thing you want to remember about rook against bishop knight. Like, you don't want to just start trading down. You make the defensive task easier. You want to utilize that extra piece attacking in the middle of the game. This game continued. Rook d1, rook c5, knight d4, rook e8, knight b3, rook c c8, e3, queen a4, queen takes d5. Alright, so white committing to the attack allows black these two united passed pawns over here, because he's giving up this pawn. Alright, so now black's attention is going to be divided between organizing his play on the queen side and trying to protect this king. Rook c2. And the problem with this immediately is this move right here. And then take. That's why he didn't do it right away. So rook c2. Rook d2 was played, and then Alicante played the move rook takes a2, which is an error right here. Queen takes a2 is the best shot, but rook takes a2. Now here, the best move for black, and Capablanca missed it. Capablanca played rook takes a2. The best move here for black is rook d4. Okay, after rook d4, then say queen a6. And now this rook is going to make a transfer up here. with this double attack here. And say, for instance, after, I don't know, queen a3, knight c1, a1, we see the white pieces dominating the board. Because remember what I said, you have the minor pieces, you want to play for an attack. So he trades down a little bit. This makes the defensive task just a smidgen easier. So queen takes a2, queen c6, rook f8, knight d4, king h8. Okay, so he vacates this square right here, so the rook can come over and then possibly g5 later. All right. Bishop e5, and there's a threat here. The threat is bishop takes g7. If white can move again, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, and followed by knight a5, and then queen f6. Let's show you. So let's say h6, or a6 rather. All of these squares are cut off, so after this move, then just queen f6. Queen here. And there's no defense here except something crazy like that. Alright, so after bishop e5, Alarcon sees it, f6. Rook g8 is possible here. Still tempted to play bishop g7, but Alarcon played f6. Knight e6, rook g8, bishop d4, and notice how he's attacking with these minor pieces. And a lot of pressure on the black's position. h6, h4, queen to b1, and now knight takes g7. Right, he played for an attack, and by golly, that's what he did. He's attacked. So queen h5, excuse me, queen g6, h5. Of course, if queen takes g7, then bishop takes f6 with the pin. Queen f7, knight f5, king h7, queen e4. Just a lot of threats. Notice how Capablanca is just pushing them around. Queen a8 check. e4, rook g7. Alright, black resigned. Why did he resign? Because his mate in two moves at the king f8, followed by queen c7, e7 check. Alright. So we see how you should play when you have the two minor pieces versus the rook. You play for an attack in the middle game, and this is a model example of that. And that's why I like showing the older games, is because you get to see kind of like the roots, like the foundation of the modern play. Because at the time it was like novel, you know. When you look at these examples, you can see the clarity, and then today you'll see the same thing going on in the modern games. That was a beautiful game by Capablanca there. All right, so again, we're almost done. This game is Now we looked at bishop and knight versus rook. Now we're gonna look at the two bishops versus the rook. And this game is from Tartakova and Bogolyubov from Bled 1931. Good old Slav defense, exchange, variation, boring. Knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, bishop f6. And I made a video on the Slav exchange variation. As boring as it seems, it's actually pretty dangerous if black missteps. e3, bishop e7, bishop d3, castle, a3, knight h5. I like to play this way against the exchange variations. It's called a Russian variation, actually. Bishop e5, f6. But everything is called the Russian variation, right? Because that's who dominated chess for, 100 years. Okay, so f6. And we have some trickery here. Here and here. G6 was played. And knight takes h7. Good move. Ideas exploiting the pins. For instance, excuse me, not that. If takes here, then queen takes is just winning. Notice the pin here because of this guy. Okay, so knight takes h7, f takes e5, knight takes f8, bishop takes f8, bishop takes g6, and then knight f6. Okay, so here we see, just taking a pause right here, we see that white has won the exchange and black has the two bishops in compensation. And black just primarily has to be careful to protect his king side. His king, not really the king side, but the king, so to speak. And we see the pawn preponderance in the center that black holds. Alright, so we see that white has the rook and two pawns against two minor pieces. Okay, but black's king side is completely demolished. Okay, so you would think that white must have more than sufficient compensation. But there's one factor in the position which makes the white's game hard. And you know what that is? They're highlighted on the board. It's those two bishops. Two bishops are very, very, very powerful together. So g4, played by Tartakova. Why g4? The threat is to clear out these squares for the queen. So if white can move again, he would play g5 and then come in with queen h5. So knight h7, h4, bishop g7, and now Tartakova takes, which it's a tough decision here. But he takes because of this pressure on d4 that's accumulating. Okay. So, for example, if he played d takes e5 here, and then knight takes e5, right, with this, and say he tried to keep the bishop on bishop c2, then after say knight c4, queen d3, knight f8, castle, bishop d7, and rook c8, then we see black building up an attack. Okay, let's go back. So he tries to, resolve, simplify things somewhat. So bishop takes, king takes, and then he plays queen c2 check, king h8, and now he takes d takes, knight takes, castle, and the same idea, right? Bishop d7, h5, and rook c8. This is dangerous, of course. Okay, so black is not interested sorry, yeah, h5 rook c8. Um, so black is not interested in trying to win this G pawn. And if you've been following the lesson, you should know why. Black with his weakened king wants to keep the position as close as possible. So he's not trying to win this G pawn and then open up the G file so that white's rooks can shine. As long as the position is like murky and closed, the black rooks cannot reach their full. Excuse me, the white rooks cannot reach their full um, potential here. Okay, so instead of trying to win a pawn or something, because you know moves like knight g4 and all that stuff, and trying to make something happen over there, he understands strategically, hey, I got to keep the position closed over there. And so what he does is he focuses on attacking, with rook c8, is attacking white's weakened king position. All right. And of course, there's no better workers to do that than having its two bishops. So h6 happens, bishop h, f8, g5, bishop e8. Of course, that's a dangerous thing going on there. f4, bishop g6, e4. And the game is getting very sharp. And if now bishop takes e4, then queen takes e4, d takes, rook takes, and f takes e5, and white will be winning. So the game's getting pretty sharp. So e4 is played, knight c4, queen d3, and yeah, tough position. Queen d3, queen b6. This kind of forces white into simplifying because of the pressure. Queen takes, rook takes because there was a check, so he had to exchange. Bishop c5 and f5. Okay, so he tries to, insert some more tactics in the position. If he just does rook d1, then this move is kind of stiff right here. Okay, so he just tries to he plays that. Okay, he takes, rook takes d5, f takes e4, king b1. The knight must be unpinned. Okay, and it's the only way is to play king b1. If he plays king d1, then knight e3, check, forking the king and the rook. So he goes this way, king b1, e3, and there's this discovered check, unfortunately for white. King a1, knight b6, harassing the rook, rook e5, bishop d4, rook e6, bishop f5, and you just see these bishops are just monstrous. Rook e7, knight c4, rook h4, and of course tactics, knight takes e3. If he takes here, then this guy is gonna drop. Okay, and what Irva wants you to understand here is notice how black is always careful to keep his two bishops. Okay, like he doesn't just try to win the c pawn, for instance, after bishop takes c3 or something like that. Okay, like for instance, he just doesn't do that. Just trying to, what I mean, getting greedy. He keeps the bishops. Instead, he takes there. Okay. Bishop c4 check. King b1. Bishop h7 check. King a2. Now white is like, please let me draw this game. Rook g8. Okay, and basically he just been repeating the moves to gain time, which is still practice today, believe it or not. Rook d7. So the game is approaching its climax as the rooks are marauding on the 7th rank and fighting against the two bishops. Bishop f5, rook takes b7, and now a5. And what's amazing about this position is how helpless the rooks are. They're like in their best. You can't get the rooks in like a better position than what they are right now, except it would be mate. Okay, a4, and now watch the maneuver. Bishop d3, rook b d7, e2. Finally, rook takes d3, e1 queen. Rook takes e1, bishop takes e1. And then the ending is just simple for black. Now I'll give it to you because it's the last game. So rook d5 was played. King h7. King b3. King g6. King c4. Rook b8. Rook b5. Rook e8. Rook d5. Rook e4 check happened. Rook d4 takes. Bishop d2, and now these guys are gone. King c4. Bishop takes g5, and white resigned. So that is it for today. I hope you learned a lot about the exchange. Okay, and when an exchange is good, and when it's not good. And like I said, I hope that helps you. There's another tool, in your bag of chess tricks there. So comments are welcome. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.